The world has never been without teachers. Each age has its teachers. Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Buddha, and Muhammad were some of the great ones. But after those, there are always special beings, perfect representatives of the messages brought by God's messengers. Rumi is one of them, one of those complete human beings. He is one of the greatest Islamic scholars, though he is known as the most outstanding and best-selling mystical poet in the West.
Rumi is, of course, a 13th century man who was born to scholars, and his father was a great scholar, considered the greatest scholar of his time. He was born, I believe, in what is now Afghanistan.
Rumi was one of the greatest poets and spiritual masters probably of all mankind. He was born in 1207, September 30th, in Balkh.
He was born in 1207 in Balkh, in present-day Afghanistan, but lived, taught, died in 1273 and was buried in Konya, in present-day Turkey, under the Turkish Empire, the Seljuks.
Because of the turmoil in the world at the time, particularly caused by Mongolian invasions, his family had to move around, and they were in Mecca, they were in Medina, but they ultimately ended up in Anatolia. And it's from this place that I believe his name came, because Rumi means the land of Rum, and Anatolia was that land. And he spent the rest of his life there.
He was a father, husband, and university professor. He merged all these aspects of life into a unified existence. He linked all of his life with the thought of God and the practices toward humanity that this thought manifests. Thus, he became one of the greatest teachers of universal love and peace. Jalaluddin married and lived with his wife, Gevher Hatun, who bore him 2 children. He is called Rumi, meaning Anatolian, because Anatolia used to be called the land of Rum, or the Romans. He also gained the title of Mevlana, which means our master, through his life's work there.
To call him Rumi emphasizes, in a sense, the Western aspect. Rum is the Byzantine Empire. When he lived, where he lived was still largely Christian. It had only recently been conquered by the Muslims. So the population was still largely Christian, largely connected in some way with the West. So we call him Rumi, which is in a sense to westernize him. But his given name was Muhammad. And in much of the Islamic literature, he's not referred to as Rumi. He's referred to as Muhammad Jalaluddin Balkhi. He was from Balkh, which is actually not from the western part of the Islamic realm, but the eastern part. So we've kind of westernized him by calling him Rumi. And we've removed the Muhammad from him. And so much of the literature that we in the West read about Rumi diminishes his Islamic roots. Before he met Shamsuddin Tabrizi and discovered fully the mystical path, he studied law. He studied the essential Islamic sciences, and he was throughout his life rooted in those. Shamsuddin Tabrizi enabled him to move beyond those, but not to negate them, not to forget them. So we Westerners tend to take Rumi as the mystic without the Islam. And we treasure those passages, those few passages, in which he seems to negate religious differences. He says, whether Hindu, whether Christian, whether Buddhist or Zoroastrian or whatever, it makes no difference. And in one sense, that's true. These are part of the world of form. But in another sense, one has to pass through that world of form, through the particularity of religion, and that's important. For me, as a Christian, to read Rumi, I do not want to read him in a way that negates his Islam, that Christianizes him, because I then lose one of the richest parts of that dialogue, of that interaction, which is an interaction of Christian particularity with Islamic particularity. If I negate that particularity, the uniqueness of each tradition, its own particular form and pattern and history, then I lose the importance, the value of the conversation. It becomes chit-chat, in a sense. So it's important to remember that Jalaluddin Rumi is Muhammad Jalaluddin Rumi, and to engage in the particularity of and the uniqueness of that particular source of his knowledge.
When his father, Bahauddin Veled, passed away in 1231, Rumi succeeded him as professor in religious sciences at the largest theological school in Konya. Only 24 years old, Rumi was already an accomplished scholar in religious and positive sciences. Although Rumi had already succeeded to his father's position as a teacher, when the great scholar and Sufi Burhanuddin al-Tirmizi arrived in Konya, Rumi studied under him and devoted himself to his service for 9 years. This training was focused on divine love, worship, austerity and abstinence, piety, consciousness of God, humility and tolerance, which are the foundations of Sufism. Rumi spent his days mostly praying and serving people who came to visit the Sufi center, preparing food for them, collecting wood for cooking and heating, and cleaning the toilets and bathrooms used by visitors. He thus learned the merit of serving people and knew that serving people is ultimately serving God.
Insight and education, of course, came from the influence of his father. But when his father died, he took the mantle of his father and expanded on the scholarship and the theology of his father.
Mother and father inculcated in him the basics of the Sufi path, the importance of reading the Quran and learning it, of fasting, of separating yourself from the things of this world. And they taught him kindness and respect and love of fellow human beings. He grew up in a household that had many visitors, and they welcomed everybody. They never left anyone out, and his father always made sure that everyone left with something. So Rumi was brought up in a very giving and very educated family.
The origin and roots of Sufism lie in the life and practices of the Prophet of Islam and the Quran. Sufism espouses a